be able to welcome today to our soul talking session at soulmusic.com two amazing, incredible singers, performers, songwriters, all kinds of. I mean, these are like these two people have done so much, and they are amongst the people that I call the unsung heroes of the music industry. I
Thank you.
really do
Thank you.
say that. So,
Thank
so we are here today. We are gathered here today. I'm gonna stop preaching now. We are gathered here today in celebration and honor of the one and only Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin,
Yes.
who has been a part of so many people's lives for
Mm.
so many years. And the joyful thing for me is that Tawatha and Fonzi have actually shared recording studios and stages with Aretha for many years. So I thought, who better to talk to us about Aretha the performer, Aretha the person, Aretha that they got to observe close up in a way that many of us have never had the opportunity to do, to actually see her preparing for shows and all the things that she did. And I don't think she's not. I always think she's still here. I don't think she's not here. She might not be in physical form, but she's with us all the time through her music and through the legacy that she has created and that will continue. So, having that lofty an introduction, I want to welcome Tawatha Agee and Fonzi Thornton to this very special occasion. And, we are going to start by asking some obvious questions to which I don't necessarily know the answer.
Mm.
So tell us, what was the first recording you ever heard by Aretha Franklin?
That's a question that's very difficult to answer because in my household, it was all Aretha all the time. So, and I was such a big fan. She was my idol. As a matter of fact, I tried to play like her because I played piano for my church choir. I tried to play like her. You study the riffs, you're like 15, 16. It's like, oh, Aretha does it like this. Let me practice this. And then when I went to college, I had a poster of her with the short red afro and the first stole, the Let Me in Your Life album. And that stayed on my wall for a long time. And never did I ever dream that I would be standing on the same stage as my idol. It's like
Yeah,
this is what dreams are made of,
Right.
yeah,
This is
Right.
what dreams are made of. So I can't, to answer your question, I don't know the first song. It could have been Skylark. It could have been Mary Don't You Weep. It could have been Respect. I really couldn't tell you that because it was all Aretha all the time. So,
yeah,
you know,
yeah. I get it. I get it.
yeah,
How about
yeah.
you, Fonzie? Your
So,
first Aretha memory?
okay. I have this is you have to stop me because I will go on and on and on and on. So anyway, probably my first awareness of Aretha's music were some of her Columbia albums, but I was not really. I think Today I Sing the Blues might be the first thing that I ever heard from Aretha.
Mm,
But I have such a great story because when I was like early in my teenage, this was before I knew Luther, which I'm going to talk about also. But the early in my teenage, I grew up in the Johnson Projects in East Harlem, New York, in New York City, right? And I was down the street at a candy store on 112th Street and Lexington Avenue, across the street, across from my building in the projects. And this woman and this voice came on the radio that said, "What you want, baby, I got it." And she, and the song started playing, and halfway through the song, all the electricity went off. The electricity went off in the store, and suddenly all the streets were dark and stuff. It was one of those major New York blackouts. So I'm listening to the song, and I'm listening to it go away, and it goes away. That was the first time I heard Aretha Franklin singing Respect. So what happened is I was so excited. I didn't know who that was. I didn't know who that soulful, powerful Clarity was. I didn't know who was bringing this to the airwaves. So after that, I was always listening to the radio to hear this song again. So I finally did hear Respect. So Respect was the first song that I ever heard from Aretha. I mean, what a way to start. So of course, going on from there, I was probably 13 going on 14. And a girl I went to church with told me about this guy named Luther Vandross that she was in high school with. She said, you need to know him. So he called me on the phone and he said, I got this vocal group called the Shades of Jade. Come over and sing for me. So long story short, his sister Ann lived across the street from me in the projects. I went over to sing for him, and I got into the Shades of Jade. And one thing about Luther was an Aretha Franklin maniac from the beginning, right? And but what he was maniac about was the call and response between Aretha and the Sweet Inspirations. So particularly Sissy, who had that lyrical soprano voice that just bolstered Aretha's call and response so great. Of course, who else in the group was Sylvia Shemwell, Estelle Brown, and Berna Smith, right? So Luther and I and Robin Clark and a few others were always walking around Harlem, and he would give us the parts to the Sweet Inspiration songs. So we were walking through Harlem singing Since You've Been Gone and Chain of Fools and Respect all the time, right? So who knew that Luther was training me for when Aretha finally called me in 2008 and said, Fonzi, I want you to put my singers together. Wow. So Respect was the first song I heard from her. And wow. Luther Vandross is a go-to person in this story that leads us from there all the way to here.
Yes. Well, I want to share with you both my first time hearing Aretha, which is slightly different. Somewhat slightly, well, yeah, I would say somewhat different. So just by way of introduction, at the time, it was 1965, I was a teenager, and I had started the first Nina Simone Appreciation Society in Britain.
She's
right?
So bad. Woo.
Appreciation Society, I love it.
We didn't call, well, see, all the people around me were, we had this little group of us who were like R&B fans in Britain, and we're talking about at that particular time period was not like R&B was everywhere, and soul. We didn't even call it soul at that point. It was R&B, rhythm and blues, and all the people were forming fan clubs. There was a Dion and Cheryl's fan club, and there was a Motown, all these Motown. I thought, well, you as a teenager, you want to be in with the in crowd. So I said, well, let me start one for Nina Simone, because I didn't, not just because I want the idea of Nina Simone, but when I heard her, I was like, oh wow. And at the airport in London, England, in June 1965, when I went to meet Miss Simone and her husband and her little 4-year-old daughter at the time, because I was terrified because I'm a little teenager meeting I'm the president of the fan club, and she was very warm and like thrilled that she had a fan club in England. We had about 5 members, but I didn't tell her that at the time. Anyway, she says to me, well, whose music do you listen to other than mine? And I said, well, I listen to Dionne, in England we call it Dionne Warwick. And she said, well, who's that? And she turned to her husband. She said, well, who's he talking about? And so her husband said, well, she's the girl who sings with Burt Bacharach, because this is 1965. So then Nina turns to me. She says, have you heard of Aretha Franklin? And I'm like, well, I think I've heard the name. But she says, well, you got a singer in England called Dusty Springfield, and she's copying her, and you need to listen to Aretha Franklin. And that was the first time I heard her name, really properly heard her name. And about 3 or 4 months later, I was at a fan club outing in Littlehampton on Seaside for the Dion and Cheryl's fan club. And somebody had a portable record player, and they put on Running Out of Fools LP. And one of the songs on it, this is one of the Columbia albums, and they put on Walk On By.
Okay.
And I said, who is that? Who is that? Because I never heard anyone else say Walk On By except Dion. And they said, oh, that's Aretha Franklin, because in England we didn't have any Arethas, so we didn't know how it was pronounced. He was pronouncing it incorrectly. So that was my first time hearing Aretha.
Oh, I
and
love
then I was like, go ahead.
I wish you said that, Running Out of Fools. I love it.
Yeah.
It's a great one.
And just to add one more thing to it is that I used all my pocket money from working at a record shop to get all the imported Aretha albums, all the Columbia albums. And so a couple of songs you guys both mentioned amongst my treasured memories. Today I Sing the Blues.
So
Ooh.
they- oh,
And then the other one, Skylark. When I
Skylark.
heard Skylark, I was, you see how I'm stuttering now? Because I didn't
Yes.
know how to respond when I heard her sing Skylark. I didn't even know the song, but there's a point in that song. I know you guys are very, very clear about technical aspects of music, but you know when she comes out of the bridge of that song and she hits this note that's like in the ceiling. I'm like, how does anybody come out of there and go right? That was the moment. That
But
was the
David,
moment when I
but
said, Aretha Franklin, there's no one else can do that.
David, to tell you though, through the years, Aretha included Skylark in her repertoire many times when we sang with her. It was always an amazing, amazing thing. She had again, as we know, she was not limited to one genre of music.
No.
Yes, it was
Oh,
gospel,
no.
pop, it was R&B, but it was jazz. It was her standing in for Pavarotti at the Oscars singing Nessun Dorma. So this is a woman who was so prolific in what she was able to do.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
Well, what I want to ask you before the next part is going to be about your actual experiences of working with her and being in the studio with her and on the stage. But before we get to that, did you either of you see Aretha in concert before you ever began working with her?
She-
No. No.
Okay.
Yes, well, Luther, as he was coming up in his career, of course, me and Luther were best friends. You know what I'm saying? So we spoke every day. We hung out. We did a lot of great stuff. And he was one of my musical mentors, as he was a mentor for all of us. Even though we were all developed artists, we also,
Yes.
he was a mentor. So Luther, as he was coming up in his career, after his solo career, came out and not much was popular. He started to become more acquainted with a lot of the artists who were the artists of the day. So
Sure.
he and Aretha became friendly. So whenever she would come to New York to do concerts, like at Radio City, or if she was at Cipriani's, or she was at Four Seasons, Luther would invite me to go with him. And we would generally sit in the first or second row, and she would sing to us, and she'd be glad we were there. And then she would always invite us backstage. So I actually met Aretha hanging out with Luther. I would say that the first time that we literally met, though, he invited me to Bill Clinton's second inauguration. And Aretha was singing on the show. Diana Ross was on the show. I think Dion was there with a few other people. But I remember going backstage and going behind this curtain, and he introduced me to Aretha. And that was also the day that I met her cousin, Brenda Corbett, and Margaret Branch, who were her long time.
Yes.
So it's the Bill Clinton inauguration, which is really the first time that I met Aretha, for her to know, okay, that's Fonzi Thornton. He's Luther's friend. He's also Luther's vocal contractor.
And you, Tawatha, what was the first? Am I correct? Correct me. Is it true that you were on the Jump to It sessions?
Oh, absolutely. I was part of that gang. And it was like, and I didn't know who it was for. We were just going in to do the session.
Yeah.
This song, Luther, this song is great. What's my part? And I had to sing second because Sissy was there. So it's like, Oh, and by the way, just a note, Sissy was my first voice teacher.
Are you kidding?
Sissy was my first voice teacher. I was auditioning for a little TV show called the Ted Mack Amateur Hour, which Gladys Knight had won years before. And so she helped me. My high school principal knew Sissy, who lived down the block across from the school, and sent me to her house. I'm knocking on the door. Oh, hi, Miss Houston. And of course, I knew who she was because of the drink art on something. She had a gospel group. And it's like, oh, the principal sent me. She says, okay, I know who you are. And she says, oh, you're pretty good. And she gave me some scales and stuff. And that's when I was like in elementary school. And years later, I started singing with Sissy on sessions. And I had to remind her that I was the little girl that knocked on her door and got a voice lesson from her. But okay, that's my Sissy story. But the Jump to It session,
yeah.
Anytime Luther had a session, for me, it was a musical celebration because I knew there would be some good singing going on. And it didn't matter who it was for. All I know was that we loved what we did and we sounded good because Luther only demanded the best. And then we were done. It's like, oh, what's this for? Oh, it's for Aretha. What?
So
because she wasn't there, and
Right.
so I'm thinking this is for Luther. This is a song for Luther, and so I said, oh, this is cool. And he said, it's for Aretha. I was like, oh my God, Aretha Franklin. Oh my God. And then when Aretha heard that, she wanted to duplicate that sound in her live shows. So she wanted the singers that sang on the record to sing with her. Right. And, and that's with Fonzi. They contacted Fonzi. Fonzi contacted me. And when I was available, I was there. Because it was like, now we got to sing Jump to It tonight, right, Aretha?
Wow. So, Fonzi, were you? I assume you were on that session.
Yes. So let me interject some pearls here. So, of course, Sissy Houston, Luther was doing like a lot of session work. He was singing with Shaka and singing with Sissy and singing with David Lasley, and they were doing Bionic Boogie and that kind of stuff. Luther was enamored of Sissy, and so he became chummy with her, and he convinced her to come in and start singing on the demos that he was going to be shopping to to get a record deal. And Tawatha and I also sang on those demos. So
CBS,
So what happened is when Luther started doing his solo recording, he basically designated me to be the vocal contractor, right? So Luther had done Never Too Much, maybe he'd done his Forever for Always for Love album, and he had written it. He had said in an interview to someone, that asked him, so what would be the next thing that you want to do with your career? He said, I would wrestle Bruno Sammartino to get a chance to produce Aretha Franklin, right? So Luther was a huge wrestling fan. So Bruno Sammartino, in case you don't know, is one of those big wrestlers. So anyway, so Clive Davis read this and he contacted Aretha, who said, well, that sounds great. I'm just starting to be familiar with who Luther Vandross is. If he has some songs, I would love to hear what they are. So Luther and Marcus, wrote Jump to
Marcus
It.
Miller,
Luther and Marcus Miller wrote Jump to It. And Luther had told me one night in a conversation, we're going to be producing Aretha. So call the core singers because we're going to be producing Luther. Now, as the contractor, the core singers were generally Tawatha, Sissy, Fonzi, Michelle Cobbs, Brenda White, and Phil Ballou. That's who were the singers on that Jump to It session that we did. Now, other people have said that they were on the session, but those are the people I saw in the room when we did Jump to It. Right?
And when I saw the credits, I said, Fonzi, who are these other people?
I said to Walker, they weren't on the mic with us. I don't know who that was.
They weren't in the studio with us. Maybe he did other tracks someplace else, but I don't know.
Right. But years later, we were doing a session in New York. This was like so we did the Jump to It album. We did the Get It Right album, you know what I'm saying? And in fact, Aretha would often open the shows with Jump to It and Get It Right as we went through the years, right, T?
Yes.
But
in the overture, it would be in the overture too. Yeah.
Exactly, right, because there was always an overture where we would sing a bunch of the songs before she would come out. Right, but what was I going to say? So we didn't really ever sing in the studio with Aretha during that time. There was always the background session and the lead session. Okay, so it wasn't until like 2007, I must say, that me, Tawatha, and Robin Clark sang a session called Stand Up For Yourself. It was a campaign AARP that we did. And it was featuring Aretha. And I remember Aretha came into the room that day and she didn't know who was going to be on the session. And she recognized me and Tawatha. And so me, Tawatha, and Robin sang background on Stand Up. So it was later in that year, 2007, that I was at home in Florida at my mother's house and the phone rang. I said, hello. She said, hello, may I speak with Fonzi Thornton, please? I said, who's calling? She said, it's Aretha. I said, who? She said, it's Aretha. I said, no, it's not. She said, yes, it is. It's Fonzi. And I said, yeah, it is Fonzi. So we talked for a couple seconds. I was shaking like a leaf. I said, why is Aretha Franklin calling me? And I don't know how she got my mother's phone number. I don't know how she reached me, but she said, I want to talk to you about coming out and putting my singers together for my tours and for my TV shows and stuff. She said, I so admire that vocal thing that y'all do with Luther out in New York. So I want to know if we can talk about this. So the first show that she contracted me to do was actually in Radio City. And it was going to be me, Tawatha, and Brenda White. And then she spoke to me also about contracting some singers for Los Angeles. Although she never talked to me directly about this. Right. She thought I was just going to show up in Los Angeles with singers. So we had a group of New York singers for a time. Then we had a group of Los Angeles singers that were Lori Perry, Valerie Pinkston, myself, and Cindy Mizell. Cindy came out from New Jersey because we couldn't find anybody in Los Angeles that I thought was the right person to sing to sing the soprano. Tawatha was busy, so Cindy came out and joined the LA group. And so that's what we did. We did the New York group for, sometimes, and we did the LA group sometimes. And then also she had her Detroit singers who were her cousin, Brenda Corbett, Millie Scott, Shelley Ponder, and Margaret Branch. I like to always give people their props.
Absolutely.
That's very important, Fonzi.
So we were Aretha's three groups, and generally I went out and worked with each of the group, but it finally got down to the fact that she would send me notes sometimes. She says, Fonzi, the work that you and that New York group are doing is just great. I want y'all to come out and do this.
Wow.
We were just, she loved what we were doing. And this is a bright woman. She was musically astute, you know what I'm saying? She wrote some of her most popular songs. She chose, she chose and managed her albums, you know what I'm saying? So this is a woman who knew musically what she wanted. So the fact that she wanted us was so, like Tawatha said, I couldn't even believe we're up here standing on stage with Aretha singing these most famous parts that had ever been sung.
Well, there was one time when we were in the studio with Aretha. We went. She flew us out to Detroit.
Yes.
Remember? Was that one of her Christmas album?
Now, well, we did some of the Christmas album in Detroit, and we did some of the Christmas album also in New York. But if you remember, Tawatha, we went back and forth to Detroit at least 4 or 5 times recording projects. Aretha liked to record at a place in Detroit called Studio One. And Tawatha, one of my favorite sessions, though, I don't know if you remember this, is we went to Detroit to record, and we were doing some recording for her son, Eddie. Because remember, Aretha was producing Eddie. And there was one point that Aretha would be sitting behind the console, as the producer and giving out the part. She said, that sounds fine, y'all, but Fonzi, could y'all sing that again? And tell Tawatha to stand in a little bit this time. And could somebody just do like a soul kind of obligato thing? Up steps Miss Agee and does the soulful obligato. And you could almost see Aretha's hair spinning around like this because it was so, she didn't know. I think that at that time, she was familiar with Tawatha's work, but she didn't know that Tawatha had sung Juicy Fruit, which is one of the biggest records of this last 50 years. So the thing is, so when Tawatha stood up to, T, I hope I'm not embarrassing you, but when Tawatha
no, not at all.
Stood up to sing the step out, Aretha was so impressed that these were the singers that she had. I remember that same day, she told Brenda White, she said, Brenda, you sound great. You still got it. So she was a fan of the music that we were doing.
Yes,
she was a fan.
I love it. Well, I just have one thing to tell you before. I know Tawatha's going to give us her take on some of that too. Absolutely. But I want to tell you 2 things. This is really funny. You were talking about Luther, and I'm going to give you just a tiny little slice of life story here. So when I lived in 1976, 75, 76, I lived in New York, and not 1976. I lived in a building right next to Luther on West 56th Street.
56th Street.
Yeah, initially, because he had that group, as you mentioned, and had the Luther group with
Tillian,
and we ran into each other in the street. And he didn't say, "What are you doing here?" He said, "Do you live?" I said, "I live in that building," and he lived the next one, because my building was the little building. It was a big. But we used to start. He said, "Well, you should come over sometime," because we knew he liked the same music, and I will never forget. He sat there and told me, he said, what I really want, he said, I really want to get my solo career going. This is about 1978. He said, what I really want to do is I want to do these great shows on the road, but I want to produce Aretha, I want to produce Dion, and I want to produce Diana Ross. I said, now, at that point, it was like, yeah, all right, that's nice. Because he wasn't yet who he became. You say that's amazing, yeah. And we talked about different Aretha songs, because and now fast forward, as you point out, he signed to Epic, and he becomes, like massively popular. And and I know that whole story that you told Fonzie about Clive Davis. That's absolute 100% accurate, true.
Mhm.
And then when Luther recorded Jump to It, one of the traditions he and I had created is when he finished a recording, because of the fact we were still neighbors, so not he moved a little bit up to 60 something street with the pink wallpaper. But anyway,
Yes.
and we used to drive around Manhattan, and he would play me the finished recording before they got mastered. He would play me the mixes and he said, I'm about to get this, I want you to hear it. And I will never forget when he played me Jump to It.
Mm.
The finished, like the just before it got mastered, everything was mixed. I heard all the background, everything. And I said, play it again. Right. We drove around Manhattan about 20 times listening to that once. I didn't even hear the rest of the album. I said, Luther, I can't, because he knew how much I loved Aretha. I said, what have you done? It was phenomenal. So I know exactly what you're talking about, Fonzie. That was, to me, was like he completely created a whole nother audience for her, as well as, and we all love those little kind of Aretha-isms.
Oh,
That was I'll tell you one more thing about that. That was the first time I think people really heard Aretha the person, because of those little kind of asides, hey kid, who
Hey,
dropped
kitty.
all that
Yeah.
stuff.
Hey, kitty.
I mean,
Drop kick who this
Drop
week?
kick too.
yes,
Yeah.
I don't know how he got her to do that, or she just wanted, but that was the first time I think many people got a glimpse into her personality.
So
And
a
it was
wonderful
brilliant, man. It
story.
was brilliant.
David, a wonderful story about that. And I wasn't there, but this is something that Luther told me. So when Luther was doing when Luther and Marcus wrote Jump to It, and Luther had finished the song and stuff like that, he wanted to do a reference vocal for Aretha to learn the song, right? So he did the reference vocal. He sang it in the second tenor male key. He sang it in the male octave for her to learn, and he sent her the song to learn it, right? But his intention was, okay, I'm singing it in this lower octave. What I want you to do is I want you to bring that belting voice that you bring, sing it in that octave above, like you and Tawatha and all of y'all can do so well, right? So Aretha comes to Media Sound to record Jump to It. She gets on the mic and she sings it in the lower male key, the entire thing in the lower male key. And she's killing it. And you get my baby love.
Yeah.
Right. And she's killing it, right? So after she finishes the take, Luther said, oh, Aretha, that was great. So now the next time she did it, Aretha put on her coat and said, that'll be fine, Vandross, and left the studio. So the vocal that we hear on Jump to It was that first take vocal that she did in Luther's key. And the thing is, but Aretha was very wise, because we had heard Luther squall, heard Aretha squall and heard her do all these amazing things. Jump to It is very sort of down and downplay, except for those embellishments and those things that you're talking about, David. So that was a great story that he told me about, about.
And I remember hearing when it came out, when the record came out, I was in Philadelphia and I went to a dance club. And that was the first time I heard the record when it came out. And everybody literally was jumping to it. It was like, oh, whoa. This is like monstrous.
Yeah. So that was so different for her. That was so different.
Exactly.
For her. And it was like, oh my God, this was current. Aretha was classic, but this brought her to currency. And it's like, wow, this is amazing. My girl.
We heard that record everywhere we went, and it just
everywhere.
Jump.
Yeah. And then you want to turn around and say, hey,
that's me, that's us.
And you can't say anything, and so you get that like that little quiet thing, like that. I got a secret. That's me singing on that record.
That's
right. Like when you're in even in the elevator or something in a store, it's like, y'all don't know.
And she similarly with Get It Right. When Get It Right came out, it became because Aretha would often open with Get It Right. There'd be times that Aretha would use only 3 of us singers. There was a period of time where me, Tawatha, and Vanice, did quite a few concerts with Aretha. And I just remember there was one concert we did in Jones Beach, Tawatha, where we opened with Get It Right. And I just remember us trying to remember them words and, just everything. And she always
Because you just see it on the set list. It's like,
whoa, oh Lordy.
Can we go over this?
That's right. Yeah.
Yes. So now I understand. I got how you got to be on the road with her, Fonzi. I'm not sure about. So Tawatha, how did you not end up? How did you get the call to go on the road with her? How did that?
Fonzi, of course.
Oh, okay, all right.
Fonzi, of course, and I sang with her because I was working with a lot of different people. So, but a chance to work with the Queen. That's like saying you work with Miles. As far as I'm concerned, it's like I work with the Queen. So I did as many jobs as I could, but it ended up being like 10 years worth of work.
Yes, it was.
So Fonzie would call and I'd be there. We do the rehearsals, and it's like, but okay. I know you haven't gotten to this question, but it's like the highlight of the working with.
Well, that was my next question. Yes.
Okay. Well, for me, we were at Radio City Music Hall, and I had the opportunity to sing the obligato to Ain't No Way.
Yes, ma'am.
And it's like, oh, this is going to be scary. But it was like, I did it, and she turned around and looked at me, and she says, oh, maybe you need to do that again. And then I had a chance to sing it a second time, and it's like, oh my God, the queen noticed me. Oh my God. But that was the highlight for me. And of course, all the time she made me cry because she touched you in such a way when she sang. Whenever she sang, what was it? Take Me to the King. It was like, oh, please don't do that.
One night with the King. One night.
You know what? Take Me to the King is Tamla Man. Okay. One night with the King changes everything. Okay. And it was just like, don't sing it.
So dramatic too, Chief.
Yes.
But how about for you, Fonzi? When you think about the performances, is that? I mean, it's hard. I mean, I can't imagine. First, I can't imagine it. How difficult it would be to choose one particular moment.
I have to say,
how many times you all share the stage.
Bits and pieces of little things.
Yeah.
So I must choose two performances. Firstly was the Kennedy Center Honors tribute to Carole King, Natural Woman. And I remember when she called me, to put together the singers for that. And I remember when we went down to do it, there was first some controversy about whether or not the singers were going to be on the stage, because she wanted us on the stage holding cordless mics, and the production people were saying, well, we don't need y'all to be on stage. She says, my singers need to be on stage with me. So when she was at the piano singing, you can see in the distance, myself, Brenda Corbett, Vanice Thomas, and Brenda White. And then later, when she gets up on the piano and removes her fur coat and drops it on the floor, there was a standing ovation. It was one of the biggest moments of my entire career. First of all, watching her get her glory as one of the only people that knows how to bring that soul fire like that. Yes. Everybody stood in their feet. Yes. Listen, Carole King was overcome. Viola Davis looked like she was going to jump out the balcony. Barack Obama was crying. It was the greatest performances I've ever done. The other performance that was amazing, we sang all the vocals on Aretha's, she sings the Divas Classics. Diva Classics. I was blessed to call Tawatha and Sissy and Brenda and Vanice. So we sang Rolling in the Deep, and we sang I Will Survive. We sang a bunch of songs, right? So when Aretha told me we were going to go on Letterman and do Rolling in the Deep, I called Sissy, Tawatha, Brenda, and Vanice, and we did Rolling in the Deep and Ain't No Mountain High Enough, right? And it was one of the greatest performances because me and Tawatha had done Letterman so many times with so many different artists. But the first time I had ever seen an artist get a standing ovation. She got a standing ovation that night, right? And contrary to popular belief, Tawatha, why was it that everyone thought that Miss Houston was, do you remember the reason that there was an issue? Do you remember what it was about?
Well, okay. I don't want to, no, I don't.
So I just want to say that Sissy Sissy, who is the godmother of background singers,
Right.
who's on the thing, she could not see the monitor.
See the
She was
tel-
trying to
see the
see the
telephone,
lyrics in the monitor, so she was squinting and she was trying to see. So people misinterpreted what the whole thing was about. She was up there doing her job. We had rehearsed the song
Wow.
at least 10 to 12 times. And when we
Yes.
got on stage, she couldn't see the monitor.
You couldn't see the monitor, right?
Right.
And Sissy was standing next to me, as opposed to them having a stool for Miss
Yes,
Houston.
yes.
They had her standing. It's like, you know, you can't do that. And so
Yeah.
it's like, Sissy, I love you, but I got to go with the,
We got to go do our
we,
hoop and
we
do.
got to do our thing. We got to do our thing. You know, it's like, I can't stand here with you on this one. Because, you know, we got to, you know, rolling in the deep, or, you know,
That's
we
right,
have to.
that's right. Aretha said, I love that movement that you and Tawatha was doing.
But, you know, there was another time, back in the day when she had the dark hair,
Yes,
and
yes.
was that a Divas 2000 thing?
No. What that was the Grammy Living Legends show.
Grammy Living Legends.
Grammy Living Legends. And remember, she came out and sang "Respect" to Tawatha. And
Oh my God!
And in rehearsal, David, you know, she was sort of laid back, you know. But when the woman came back, she had hair to the sky. She had makeup, this amazing white dress, and it was myself, Margaret Branch, Tawatha, and Brenda. Now, to tell you, from the day that I met Tawatha, okay, Luther had called us for a session for the actress Betty Buckley, and he called me, Irene Cara, and he said, Fonzi, there's a singer I'm bringing in today that's going to knock your socks off. And who was it? It was Tawatha Agee. She was coming from her teaching job. She was carrying a valise. She took that coat off and took that valise, put that valise down, and stepped to the mic and unleashed that soprano. And after that, she was always the first person I called.
Yes.
For all of my years as a contractor, she would always be the first person I would call. Tawatha, can you do this gig? And this is how, like she said, when Aretha contacted me to put together the singers, Tawatha was the first person I called.
Wow.
Tawatha, are you available to
First
sing?
call. Yeah.